The science of emotional intelligence. Imagine sitting in a high-stakes board meeting, a tense family discussion, or a critical negotiation. Someone says something that instantly sets off an alarm inside you. Surprised, your heart rate accelerates, your body turns warm, and within a fraction of a second, an overwhelming urge to retaliate, defend, or completely freeze takes over. Before your mind can even formulate a reasoned thought, the reaction has already escaped your lips. Why does this happen, even to the smartest, most educated, and most rational among us? Thoughtful. For decades, society operated under a singular assumption. Cognitive intelligence, our IQ, was the ultimate predictor of success, leadership, and human capability. We measured standardized test scores, praised technical fluency, and assumed that a sharp, analytical mind naturally translated to an effective life. Yet we continuously observe a striking paradox. Highly brilliant individuals frequently blow up their personal relationships, derail critical projects during moments of pressure, or paralyze entire teams through poor communication. Meanwhile, individuals with modest technical scores quietly lead resilient organizations, navigate volatile crises with poise, and foster deeply loyal relationships. The answer lies in how our brains are wired. Every piece of sensory information, every sound you hear, every expression you observe, every email you read, enters the brain at the base, passing through the primitive limbic system before ever reaching the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought. This means we literally feel before we think. When a perceived threat occurs, a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala can capture the brain's resources in milliseconds, triggering an automatic fight-or-flight response long before the executive brain can weigh options. It is an evolutionary mechanism designed to protect us from predators, but in the modern world, it fires during emails, performance reviews, and everyday arguments. This is where the science of emotional intelligence becomes essential. Emotional intelligence is not a vague soft skill or a collection of pleasant manners. It is a precise, neuroscientifically backed capacity to recognize, understand, and direct these fundamental human drives. If you stay with me through this speech, you will discover the exact neural mechanics that dictate how you respond under pressure. More importantly, you will learn how the brain's natural neuroplasticity allows you to physically rewire these habitual pathways, giving you complete control over your focus, your relationships, and your performance when it matters most. Our brain's architecture was built for ancient survival, leaving us equipped with evolutionary emotional reactions that often misfire in modern, high-stakes environments. High emotional intelligence hinges on managing the physical pathway between the primitive limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, preventing emotional triggers from overriding rational thought. Unlike fixed IQ, the neural circuitry governing emotional self-regulation, empathy, and social coordination can be intentionally rewired at any stage of life. True mastery relies on an integrated framework: self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and relationship management. In leadership, high-stress decision-making, and long-term health, emotional intelligence consistently predicts success, resilience, and fulfillment far more reliably than cognitive intellect alone. The modern world has transformed at a rate that far outpaces our physical evolution, leaving us with an internal biological mismatch that plays out daily in our personal and professional lives. To understand why we so frequently experience emotional friction, sudden bursts of frustration, or intense stress in response to minor events, we have to look back at the origins of the human brain. Our neurological architecture was forged in an environment governed by immediate physical hazards, predators, sudden environmental shifts, and territorial threats. In that ancient context, rapid survival responses were favored over slow, deliberate analysis. The brain developed dedicated structures designed to detect perceived dangers instantly and activate a cascade of physiological changes before the rational mind could even evaluate the situation. This evolutionary design served us remarkably well for hundreds of thousands of years, ensuring that our ancestors reacted without delay to real, life-threatening dangers. However, the world we inhabit today bears almost no resemblance to the environment that shaped those neural circuits. Instead of confronting physical predators, we navigate complex social hierarchies, inbox overloads, tense performance reviews, high-stakes negotiations, and subtle interpersonal conflicts. The crucial issue is that our brain's emotional architecture has not fundamentally changed to distinguish between a physical threat to our life and a symbolic threat to our ego, status, or schedule. When a critical email arrives or a colleague challenges our position during a meeting, the primitive survival mechanisms within the brain fire with the exact same urgency as if we were facing a physical predator. The heart rate accelerates, stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood the bloodstream, and attention narrows strictly to the perceived threat. In this state, the brain prioritizes immediate self-preservation over nuanced reasoning, long-term perspective, or collaborative problem-solving. We are effectively attempting to handle intricate, modern psychological challenges using an ancient neurological alarm system built for raw survival. This evolutionary mismatch creates a perpetual state of friction in everyday life. Because our immediate emotional reactions were calibrated for a far simpler and more dangerous reality, they frequently misfire in contemporary settings. An unexpected setback or an argumentative remark triggers an intense physiological internal alarm, tempting us to retaliate, withdraw, or freeze up entirely. Rather than responding with clarity and strategic intent, we find ourselves reacting out of primitive impulse. The high cost of this misalignment is evident everywhere. Burned bridges, hasty decisions made under pressure, unnecessary arguments, and chronic background stress that drains our energy. Recognizing this fundamental mismatch is the first crucial step toward developing true emotional mastery. It frees us from the mistaken belief that our intense emotional reactions are personal flaws or unpredictable outbursts. Instead, they are predictable biological responses triggered by an outdated neural alarm system. Once we understand that our physiological response is simply an ancient survival protocol operating in a modern context, we can begin to insert a deliberate pause between the initial stimulus and our ultimate response. By creating that mental space, we allow the slower, more sophisticated analytical regions of the brain to come online, overriding primitive instincts and replacing automatic reactions with thoughtful, constructive choices that actually serve our long-term goals in today's world. At the center of human behavior lies a powerful biological pathway that determines whether we respond to life's challenges with thoughtful strategy or knee-jerk impulse. To understand why even the most rational individuals occasionally lose control during moments of high pressure, we must trace the physical highway that sensory information travels as it moves through the brain. Every sight, sound, word, and interaction we experience enters the brain through the spinal cord and moves directly toward the limbic system, the primitive, emotional processing center. Only after passing through these deep emotional structures does the information reach the prefrontal cortex, the sophisticated seat of logic, planning, self-control, and executive decision-making. This means that as a matter of pure biological hardware, every input is felt before it is thought through. Within the limbic system rests a small, almond-shaped structure known as the amygdala. The amygdala functions as the brain's central alarm system, perpetually scanning incoming data for signs of danger, insult, or threat. When it detects a perceived crisis, it possesses the unique anatomical authority to bypass the analytical prefrontal cortex altogether. In a fraction of a second, the amygdala initiates what is scientifically recognized as an amygdala hijack. It commandeers the brain's resources, triggering an immediate flood of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, elevating heart rate and shifting the body into a state of fight, flight, or freeze. Because this process occurs at lightning speed, our physiological and emotional reaction occurs long before the rational brain has had the opportunity to evaluate the facts, weigh the consequences, or construct an intelligent response. In ancient times, this neural shortcut was an essential mechanism for physical survival, allowing immediate action when facing life-threatening predators. In modern life, however, physical threats have largely been replaced by psychological and social pressures. The amygdala cannot easily differentiate between a physical predator and a harsh critique from a supervisor, an unexpected financial hurdle, or a heated argument with a family member. It reacts to social threats with the same biological intensity as if life itself were on the line. When an amygdala hijack occurs during a high-stakes meeting or a delicate personal conversation, our cognitive capacity drops dramatically. The prefrontal cortex is effectively starved of resources, rendering us temporarily incapable of nuanced thinking, broad perspective, or empathetic listening. High emotional intelligence hinges directly on our ability to navigate and manage this neural highway effectively. It is not about suppressing or eliminating emotions, which is biologically impossible, but rather about altering the speed and manner with which emotional signals transition into rational action. When we cultivate high emotional intelligence, we learn to recognize the early physiological warning signs of an incoming hijack, such as a sudden surge of heat, muscle tension, or a racing heart. By catching these biological cues in real time, we can consciously implement strategies to intercept the alarm signal before it completely overrides our executive functions. By taking a brief intentional breath or inserting a deliberate pause during moments of rising tension, we physically allow the necessary time for sensory information to travel past the primitive amygdala and fully engage the prefrontal cortex. This simple biological delay restores full cognitive function, enabling us to cool down the alarm system and assess the situation with clarity. Mastering this physical mechanism grants us the power to transform automatic, destructive reactions into chosen, effective responses, ensuring that our intellect remains in control regardless of how intense the emotional environment becomes. For generations, psychological science operated under the rigid assumption that our emotional disposition, social capacity, and capacity for self-control were largely fixed in early adulthood. It was widely believed that while we could accumulate technical knowledge, our fundamental temperament and emotional responses were static traits locked into place by our genetic inheritance. Modern neuroscience has completely dismantled this dogmatic view through the discovery of neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable capacity to physically alter its structure, neural connections, and chemical pathways in response to focused attention, repeated behavior, and conscious effort. This means that unlike raw cognitive intelligence, which remains relatively stable across a lifespan, the neural circuitry that governs emotional intelligence is extraordinarily malleable and open to continuous transformation at any stage of life. At the physical level, every thought we repeat, every emotional pattern we indulge, and every behavioral reaction we choose strengthens specific pathways within the brain. When we repeatedly succumb to immediate frustration, react defensively to criticism, or indulge in chronic anxiety, we are physically fortifying the neural high-speed highways that make those automatic responses easier to trigger in the future. The biological principle is simple. Neurons that fire together wire together. However, neuroplasticity operates as a two-way street. Just as unmanaged emotional habits solidify destructive pathways, intentionally practicing self-regulation, empathetic listening, and self-awareness physically rewires the brain to support healthier, more adaptive responses. When we engage in the intentional practice of emotional intelligence, we are essentially sculpting our own neurology. For example, every time an individual experiences a sudden spike of anger or anxiety, but consciously pauses to take a deep breath instead of immediately reacting, a profound biological shift takes place. By refusing to let the automated alarm response dictate their action, they dampen the activation of the primitive limbic system, while simultaneously firing the regulatory circuits in the prefrontal cortex. With persistent practice, this conscious choice weakens the old, reactive pathways and builds robust new structural connections. Over time, what initially required immense willpower becomes an effortless, automatic baseline response. This capacity for structural modification extends directly into our ability to cultivate empathy and manage relationships. The neural circuits responsible for reading subtle social cues, recognizing emotional tone, and feeling genuine compassion for others are subject to the exact same dynamic laws of neuroplasticity. By deliberately directing our attention toward understanding another person's perspective, we stimulate and expand the mirror neuron systems and cortical regions responsible for social processing. As a result, empathy ceases to be a mysterious, elusive personality trait and reveals itself for what it truly is, a trainable neural skill that grows stronger with deliberate application. The implications of neuroplasticity for personal growth and leadership are staggering. It means no individual is permanently trapped by their past conditioning, quick temper, or social awkwardness. We possess the innate biological hardware required to systematically retrain our brain's emotional software. By committing to consistent, conscious practice, monitoring our internal states, interrupting automatic reactions, and deliberately choosing constructive behaviors, we actively guide the physical evolution of our own mind. Through the power of neuroplasticity, emotional mastery becomes not an unattainable ideal, but an accessible, incremental process of neurological re-engineering. To truly understand how emotional mastery operates in daily life, we must look beyond abstract concepts and examine the structured framework that holds it together. Emotional intelligence is not a singular skill or a vague personality trait, but rather an integrated system composed of four distinct core pillars: self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and relationship management. These four dimensions do not exist in isolation. They function as a sequential, highly interdependent biological dynamic where each pillar serves as the necessary foundation for the next. Without a firm grounding in the internal domains of understanding and directing oneself, it is impossible to effectively navigate the external domains of understanding and guiding others. The absolute cornerstone of this whole framework is self-awareness. This is the continuous, real-time ability to accurately recognize our own emotions, triggers, and cognitive patterns as they arise. Self-awareness requires observing our internal state without immediate judgment, noticing the subtle physiological signals, such as a tightening in the chest or a spike in body temperature, that signal an emerging emotional state. Without self-awareness, we operate on complete autopilot, blindly driven by unconscious impulses that dictate our choices before we even realize what is happening. We cannot manage what we do not notice, which makes self-awareness the indispensable starting point for all emotional development. Once self-awareness is established, it enables the second fundamental pillar: self-regulation. Self-regulation is the active management of those internal states and emotional drives. It is not about suppressing, denying, or burying genuine feelings, which is both psychologically damaging and neurobiologically impossible over the long term. Instead, self-regulation is the ability to create a crucial delay between an emotional trigger and your ultimate physical response. It allows you to hold strong emotions like anger, fear, or anxiety in conscious awareness without letting them instantly commandeer your actions. Through self-regulation, you transform volatile, impulsive reactions into deliberate, aligned responses that serve your overarching long-term goals. Building directly upon these two self-focused foundations are the social dimensions of emotional intelligence, beginning with the third pillar, empathy. While self-awareness and self-regulation allow you to tune into your own internal climate, empathy is the capacity to accurately read and understand the emotional landscape of others. It relies on complex neural architecture that allows us to sense the unspoken feelings, hidden anxieties, and perspective of those around us. Empathy requires setting aside our own immediate biases and defensive instincts long enough to truly listen and absorb another person's subjective reality. It is the vital bridge that converts individual self-mastery into genuine human connection. The final culmination of this entire framework is relationship management, which represents the practical application of the first three pillars combined. Relationship management is the ability to use your self-awareness, emotional self-control, and empathetic insights to foster strong bonds, resolve deep interpersonal conflicts, inspire teams, and influence others constructively. Whether navigating a complex negotiation, de-escalating a heated argument, or motivating a disillusioned colleague, success depends entirely on how effectively you integrate these components. When all four pillars operate in harmony, they transform emotional intelligence from a theoretical idea into a formidable biological and social capability that directly dictates our capacity to lead, connect, and thrive. For decades, conventional wisdom held that cognitive intellect, measured by traditional intelligence quotients, was the ultimate determinant of human success, career advancement, and personal achievement. However, rigorous organizational research and epidemiological studies have fundamentally challenged this assumption, revealing that raw intellect accounts for only a small fraction of the variance in real-world outcome metrics. While a high IQ acts as an essential entry threshold, granting access to complex technical fields and prestigious positions, it does not predict who will ultimately excel, lead effectively, or maintain long-term well-being under intense pressure. The decisive differentiator consistently emerges as emotional intelligence, which serves as the ultimate multiplier for technical capability, leadership effectiveness, and overall life satisfaction. In high-stakes professional environments and leadership roles, the measurable advantage of emotional intelligence becomes strikingly evident. When unexpected crises arise, market conditions shift, or high-pressure decisions must be made in real time, high technical competence alone is often insufficient to prevent paralysis or destructive reactivity. Leaders who possess high emotional intelligence excel because they maintain psychological stability, keeping their executive decision-making capabilities fully operational while managing the collective stress of their teams. Furthermore, organizational dynamics depend entirely on social alignment, trust, and clear communication. A brilliant strategist who lacks emotional regulation and empathy often creates toxic workplace cultures, high turnover, and operational friction, whereas an emotionally intelligent leader mobilizes collective energy, inspires psychological safety, and drives sustainable output. Beyond career performance and leadership metrics, the impact of emotional intelligence extends deeply into physical health and physiological resilience. Chronic emotional dysregulation, manifested as unmanaged stress, frequent bouts of anger, or persistent anxiety, keeps the body's sympathetic nervous system in a state of perpetual overdrive. This biological profile leads to sustained elevations of cortisol and inflammatory biomarkers, which directly impair cardiovascular health, weaken immune function, and accelerate cellular aging. Conversely, individuals who actively practice emotional regulation and maintain strong empathetic interpersonal networks exhibit lower baseline stress metrics, faster recovery from physiological arousal, and lower incidence of stress-related chronic illnesses. Emotional mastery acts as a vital protective buffer, safeguarding biological health against the unavoidable friction of daily life. Ultimately, the measurable advantage provided by emotional intelligence lies in its ability to translate raw potential into consistent, real-world flourishing. High technical skill without emotional control creates brilliant but volatile individuals who frequently stumble when confronted with interpersonal friction or sudden failure. In contrast, those who master their internal landscape cultivate a durable form of resilience that allows them to navigate setbacks without losing composure, adapt swiftly to changing circumstances, and build deep, enduring connections across every domain of life. As empirical research continues to document its profound influence across leadership, physical health, and psychological well-being, emotional intelligence stands confirmed not as a soft luxury but as the hard currency of human achievement and lifelong fulfillment.